One. All right, join us now on Drive the Lane, NBA reporter for ESPN. This is long overdue. We tried to talk to him a while ago about the Warriors, but then D'Angelo Russell got hurt. So finally, the NBA season has concluded, and we welcome Nick Friedell to the show. Nick, welcome.
Guys, it's great to be with you.
We are happy to have you. We're a little upset that the NBA season is over because we don't know when we're getting basketball. But before we get to questions like that, first question, what were your immediate takeaways from the NBA Finals?
I still can't believe the Heat actually got all that way. And the fact that they did is a credit to Jimmy Butler, Eric Spoelstra. Truly, like, so many people around the league sometimes they roll their eyes at that, the Heat culture. But the reason the Heat were there, on top of all those players playing at a level above where they might have been in a regular world, is because they all bought into it. And to get through the bubble, and the Lakers obviously deserve a huge amount of credit for winning the title, but to get to that point in the bubble, you need mental toughness. And that Heat team has it in spades. So on top of the fact that there's going to be so much about LeBron and AD and the Lakers putting it together, I think the biggest takeaway out of those finals is that the Heat were able, as a fifth seed, to get all the way through and get within 2 games of a championship.
So obviously this season will be known as LeBron winning his 4th ring, but to more people, to people like me, it'll be more about the bubble. I mean, obviously incredible, obviously groundbreaking. Besides the TBT, of course, to our friends at the TBT. I mean, seemed impossible. What are your takeaways just from the NBA side, not the basketball side, but the NBA's job and making this season happen?
I thought the fact that the NBA made it work and that everybody was safe down there and that no players tested positive and they made it happen from start to finish is something that will be remembered forever. And I'm with you. I know that there's a lot of focus, as there should be, on LeBron, and that LeBron-Michael conversation is only going to become more prominent over the next few years. But the fact that this happened at all, that there were playoffs, that there was the bubble, that those TV contracts were fulfilled in a lot of ways, it's a gigantic credit to Adam Silver, Michelle Roberts, the NBA, the NBPA, and for the players for making it happen, because it was just unbelievable the amount of work that went into it, and for it to get from where it did, where we saw the team doctor running on the floor in Oklahoma City in March, to then seeing LeBron hold the trophy in October, is something the league should be proud of and will be remembered for years and years to come.
So, not to brag, but way back on August 13th, I put in a bet that was the Heat will come out of the East, $50 to win 400. And Joey will tell you, after every Heat win, I said that $400 is coming. Let me tell you. So I was very happy with the outcome of the season.
That's your storyline, not LeBron winning. It's you winning that bet, right?
Exactly. My question to you, all right, which one of these, headlines that we've heard over the last few years is dumber or is less true than the other? All right. LeBron's only going to LA to make movies. The Lakers gave up too much for AD.
Well, the stupider one is that the Lakers gave up too much money, or too many prospects for AD, because there wasn't anything you wouldn't give up on that roster to land Anthony Davis. I think what we've seen, guys, is that as a number 1 star on a team, you're going to get maybe to the second round, and we saw them have some success in New Orleans. But as a secondary star to one of the game's greatest players of all time, or one of the greats in the league now, certainly, Anthony Davis is a perfect fit for what they need. So on top of LeBron's legacy, and again, that is such a huge focal point, Anthony Davis's legacy now all of a sudden gets cemented a lot more than it had been prior to this, because he showed in the biggest of games, not only can he show up, but he can dominate at times. I mean, there were plenty of people who thought, at least in the beginning of the series, hey, Anthony Davis is going to be MVP of the finals. And then LeBron had a couple performances there at the end that got him to that point. But I think there was a lot of doubt about LeBron's intentions as far as when he got to LA. You're thinking, all right, how much is basketball at the forefront? And this goes back to your question of the forefront of what he wants to do. And what he did in this moment in time is, after a terrible year last season, he kind of went, all right, I'm still, if not the best in that conversation as being the guy in this league. I can still put a team on my back at times, and I just needed the right star next to me, in this case Anthony Davis, to help me out. So this series, this bubble run, it will be LeBron. Everything's always about LeBron. But Anthony Davis really helped himself in the long run because of the way he performed.
While we're on the topic of legacies, who cemented their Hall of Fame status more by winning this championship? Dwight Howard or Rajon Rondo?
I always had Dwight in already.
Me too.
So Rondo is going to be one of those cases, guys, where it's going to be right on the cusp. I think Rondo, who's talked openly about wanting to be a coach, if Rajon goes into coaching and he wins a title, then I think he's stamped. Right now, as a player, it's still in question. But Dwight, no matter what he did, and to his credit, I didn't think he'd have the impact on this year that he did. I thought Dwight was always a Hall of Famer because Dwight, in his era, was one of the very, very best. It's kind of gotten lost because he's been hurt for the last few years, but people have forgotten. And I say this as a proud Orlando native. Dwight was unbelievable. He was young. Unbelievable. So he's going in. Rondo will probably go in over time, but I think he needs a little bit more to stamp his case.
I agree with you. Joey and I have talked about this before, because we kind of talked about who we did a big thing for TBT, where we were the co-hosts of Inside TBT, which was a little show we did. And we talked about like who we would want coaching. We both said Rondo without communicating about it. So we agree with the coaching thing 100%. I heard.
And guys, I just add this real fast. When it ends, when his career ends, whenever it does, the next year or two, he's going to be in serious demand. Rondo is going to get a job. It'll be like when Jason Kidd retired a few years back. Rondo's going to be the guy that a lot of teams already know, hey, this guy's won titles. He has the respect of the players. He's going to fit in somewhere.
I can't think of a player in the last, 10 years where more people have talked about how good of a coach he's going to be while he's still playing than Rondo. Maybe a little Jason Kidd. It's kind of like the point guard thing. Like the good point guards, people are like,
it's always the point guard thing.
Yeah. But like Rondo is always talked about being a coach. Like I feel like when the Bulls brought him in, Nick, everyone was like, they're bringing him in as another coach. And then when the Lakers brought him in, they're like, it's just another coach on their bench. But then we saw this.
And then there he is draining threes the other night. And you're like, whoa, he can still do it. So he can still surprise you. That playoff Rondo moniker has been well earned. And it's something that he just threw out a reminder to the world, like, hey, I'm not done yet. I can still play at the highest level.
That Lakers roster in their prime, they really aren't where they stand right now. They weren't the most talented team in the NBA. Obviously, LeBron and AD puts them over the hump in terms of talent. But if you put them all in their prime, that's like the best team ever assembled. Yeah. It's crazy. It's crazy. We could talk about the Lakers forever. Obviously, there's more stuff to talk NBA-wise. My next kind of question is, we wouldn't be doing our job if we didn't look to the future, obviously, right? What storylines have your attention heading into next season, whenever that might start?
I'm curious, and part of this is because I'm around this team more often than anything still in the moment, how the Warriors jump into this whole deal. And the only team I think – it's funny you mentioned the Lakers in their prime with their group, I'd still argue that KD, Steph, Draymond, Clay team,
Yeah.
that first couple of years, oh my Lord, that team is just incredible that team came to be in the moment. But I think for next year, I'm curious to see what the Clippers do, because you make the change and you get rid of Doc and you have to bring somebody else in. That team, guys, I thought they were so clearly above everybody else. I ended up being wrong. I thought the Clippers would come together with Kawhi and win, and it didn't happen. So now you have this coaching change, and that's going to be interesting to follow. But for me, to see what happens with Steph, Clay, Draymond, how do you weave Wiggins into what you've got now, and then what do you do with that number 2 pick? Do you trade it? Do you keep it and hope that you can get a star for the future? There's a lot of questions around that group, but I tell you this as someone who's watched them now the last couple of years, they hear everything that everybody's saying, and they know that everybody's kind of waved goodbye to the title.
I forgot about them.
I think that, to me, is the most intriguing on top of what happens with Giannis in Milwaukee. And I know, having talked to him over the years, he loves it there. But if you don't win, that love can shift a little bit. So that's the storyline throughout the whole league that is going to be most prominent, because he is that good. And if you put him in the right situation, it's only a matter of time before he wins the title.
I call him Giannis. Oh, because he makes me yawn when he's out on the court.
Oh, man. Come on now. He does some stuff every night where you're like, huh?
It's just too – one day I thought of it. I was like, boom, Giannis. I got to run with it. I was like, got to tell my friends.
And what was the reaction that they gave you when you ran with it?
Well, now it's become a running joke, and my other friend calls Zion. Well, he'll type out Zion, but he'll do the ZZZ sleeping emoji. So now we have Giannis and ZZZ Zion. So they're both kind of jokes. Nick,
that one's bad.
my next question. People kind of fell in love with the Suns in the bubble this year. Everyone loves Ja Morant. Everyone thinks the Pelicans are gonna, take that next step next year. All right, who knows what's going to happen with the T-Wolves with Cat and our guy D'Lo from Ohio State. How close are we to the NBA going with the top 16 teams and not East versus West?
I think they're still going to hold to East-West. And it's funny that we're talking about this, because I went to China a couple years ago during that trip where it was the Timberwolves and the Warriors. And the question that you just asked me is the exact same question I asked Adam Silver. And I said, at what point do you guys go from 1 through 16 regardless of conference? And he's like, we talk about it. We're still talking about it. And certainly with the private planes and the ability to get to different places, it's easier than it has been in years past. But I don't see it changing anytime soon. I think the league likes that there are still rivalries that they can play off one another. They know how far the travel can be. I mean, guys, in a normal world, can you imagine Miami to LA for game 5, game 6, and then potentially back to LA?
It'd be fun for you, though. It'd be fun for you, not for the
Miami and LA. I would never sleep. It would be 2 weeks of just going back and forth awake all the time.
You, Rachel Nichols, and Scottie Pippen would have too much fun with the Miami.
That would be. I think that's what the media people in the league were all upset about, because they're looking Miami and LA. They're like, oh my God, this would be like the dream finals, because you'd be on South Beach and then you'd go hang out in LA for a week or so. But anyway, that illustrates why the 1 through 16 will be a problem, because can you imagine Miami, LA in the first round? That it would just wear on everybody. And I think after they tried it, they'd kind of go, do we really want to do this long term? Who knows?
Well, then do you think the alternative to that is to run with, those play-in games? And definitely next year where we might see a reduced season, do you think it could potentially be 9, 10, 11, 12 teams in the divisions that get play-in games?
The league loves those play-in games. I think they are going to try hard. I don't know if it would go deeper than 8, 9, maybe 10, 11 as like a mini play-in to the big play-in game. But I can tell you guys from personal experience that season a couple years ago, in fact, when Jimmy got the Timberwolves to the playoffs, Minnesota played Denver last night of the regular season. Out of all the games I've covered in all the years I've been doing this, for a regular season game, that was probably the most intense game I've ever seen. And the league knows that. The league knows that it wants to drum up as much interest and excitement as it can going into the postseason. So I think the play-in games are here to stay. The question will be, do they go 8, 9, 10, 11? How do they shuffle the teams, especially when you've got an example like the Eastern Conference this year, where it was like Orlando, Brooklyn, and then the just ... So we'll see, but without question, I think the playing games are going to happen and they'll continue.
So we mentioned Jimmy Butler. We're huge Jimmy Butler guys, as I'm sure you are as well. How ridiculous was this year? Or were you like, you know what, I expect that out of Jimmy Butler? Because at some point you got to be, rational. Like, that was insane. The run that he took them on was insane. What are your thoughts on Jimmy buckets?
It's been unbelievable to watch, because I've covered him since the night he came into the league. He got drafted by the Bulls. To think that Jimmy has gone from a guy who barely played that first year and a half in Chicago to the face of a team that was 2 games away from winning the title is stunning. And guys, I'd say the only person who thought that Jimmy Butler could do this in the league was Jimmy Butler himself. That's it. That is the list.
Not Gar Forman?
It's not Gar. It's not the Bulls, but it's nobody. In defense of my old pals Gar and Pax, nobody thought this. Nobody thought that Jimmy could be the Jimmy that he's been at this level. And it's a credit to him, because in all the years that I have not only been in Chicago, but been around the league, I've never, ever seen a player go from the 15th guy in the roster to the star of the team. And that's what Jimmy has turned himself into. I think in a normal world, again, I don't know if Miami gets all the way to this point, but we're not in a normal world. So it's all moot now. And no matter what people would say moving forward about Jimmy, he forever changed the narrative about it. Because even if the Heat come out next season and they're not able to do what they want to do and get back to that level as a title contender, they were 2 games away from winning it right now. And the reason we're talking about Heat culture and all this other stuff is because of Jimmy, and because he's got a lot of like-minded guys around him who see the game the same way he does and want to put in the work. So to see him have that kind of success is unbelievable, but it's all a credit to him.
So if this were the NFL, the Heat would have the hardest schedule in the league next year and probably not make the playoffs, which is what usually happens to the Super Bowl runner-up. But because it's the NBA, I personally think that the Heat could be a top 2 seed in the East next year. Who knows? Like, it's tough. The Bucks, back-to-back years, best record in the NBA, not even, no title. It's tough to do that 3 years in a row. So who knows what the Bucks will be next year. What's your way too early, because we don't even know when the season is starting, way too early, maybe 3 title favorites for next year?
You got to put the Lakers up there. And you're talking to somebody who wasn't sure that the Lakers could bring it all together this year. I mean, the fact that the Lakers came out and won the title and LeBron and AD worked so quickly with the pieces around them, that's a huge credit to the roster into Frank Vogel, who I think gets lost in the shuffle of people who had an impact on that group. So I'd go Lakers. I still say the Clippers have an incredible amount of talent on that team. They just need to put it together the right way. And then that third team, because as we sit here right now, if you told me the Heat were adding another star, there's been talk about Bradley Beal, there's been whoever, whether it was a trade, whether it was free agency, if you told me they had one more piece, I'd say the Heat. The Heat are it. They're ready. They know they can get there now. I've never been a believer in Milwaukee as a true title contender. I just don't think that not just Giannis, but I don't like the construction of the roster. It's like you look at the roster and it's like Giannis, Chris Middleton, and then night to night, I don't know. So
Pat Connaughton,
DiVincenzo, he's a friend. No bagging on DiVincenzo. We like him.
And they're all nice players, but in order to win a title,
we agree with you. We've always said that we just don't. We've never bought into Milwaukee. But I think one team that you haven't mentioned, which deserves to be mentioned, is the Nets. I mean, deserve to be mentioned. Are they going to be able to do it in 1 year? Maybe not. But I mean, they got two of their best seven guys.
And to your point, you can't say no on the Nets flatly.
Right.
And I say this as someone who watched Kevin Durant work day to day that first year I was in Golden State. As far as pure talent goes, LeBron is LeBron, at least for our era. I mean, I'm a Jordan guy. Nobody's going to top Michael. But LeBron is the guy and has been for years. Pure talent, though, in a game before he got hurt, I don't think people fully embrace how unbelievable Kevin Durant is. I mean, Kevin, before he hurt his Achilles, to see him he could dominate. I think back to that Clippers series from now a couple of years ago in the playoffs when he was going, I'm Kevin Durant, and then he comes out and drops like 40 on a Clippers team that was damn good defensively when they wanted to be. So off an Achilles, that's really tough, but if he's anywhere near where he was, they're always going to have a shot. Kyrie he says a lot of weird stuff, but he is so damn talented when he's healthy. The question will be, as it was for the Lakers this year, what happens to the rest of the group? How does the rest of that roster look? Karis LeVert had some good moments. Is he ready to take that step? It reminds me of the conversation surrounding Kuzma going into this year for the Lakers. Could Kuzma be the third guy? Lakers, in the end, really didn't even need Kuzma. Yeah, I mean,
oh my gosh. Don't even start with Kuzma.
But there wasn't even – it's so interesting because it ended up being KCP hit a ton of big shots. Rondo hit a few big shots in the finals. Caruso had his moments. Like, Kuzma was like, what's he doing? What's going on out there? So but I think the Nets can put it together this year. No, I think it'll take some time. I like Steve Nash hire. I think that's going to work. The question will be, how do you fill up the rest of the roster with guys who are going to help in the postseason? And that's what nobody has the answer for right now.
Of course, Steve Nash is going to work because he's a point guard as a coach. That's just how it works, right? So
there's no baseball. All those catchers end up being managers at some point.
It's the same thing, and that's working really well in Chicago. So we're good.
Nick, so a weird thing that happens in the NBA is people's narratives kind of change. You know, everyone hated LeBron when he was in Miami, and then everyone hated the Warriors and wanted LeBron to win the title for Cleveland. And then everyone wanted the Warriors to beat the Raptors because, you know, Steph was doing it undermanned and KD was hurt, and he came back, and Clay with the coolest moment ever with the tearing the ACL and knocking down the free throws. What narrative change do you think we could expect to see? Like, I think people could come out and be like, wow, Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons are my favorite duo in the league. I love them. They deserve a title this year. Like, something crazy like that's got to happen.
Andrew, it's a good point in this sense. Doc Rivers has so much clout in the league, and he's won and he's lost at the highest possible levels. But I think Doc and his presence give Embiid and Simmons this moment to kind of start fresh. And I've never bought into the Sixers as being legit title contenders just because I've never believed that the way the roster was constructed could get them all to stay healthy. The way that Ben Simmons could hit threes, he's going to need to at some take his game to the next level. But with Doc there, the experience that he's got, it's as good a chance as any to hit the refresh button. And if it doesn't work now for the Sixers, it's never going to work for this core. Then you're looking at you have to pick Simmons or Embiid and trade off one for some different players because it's not happening the way they expected it to. So out of all the narrative shifts, I'm not ready to completely give up on Philly, but I think they have the best chance to go from, maybe this team isn't meant to be to, okay, people were too quick to say it's never going to happen for them because they needed the right coach and they needed the right pieces around them.
Well, most people before this playoffs probably would have Ben Simmons above Jimmy on their list of stars. And they would have had Embiid over Bam. So you look at it, and just with those two pieces, and obviously they're different players, but you think that if the Heat could get to the finals, the Sixers building around those two pieces would be able to. But obviously so much more factors into that. Joey, I'll let you ask a question, but I want to ask this before I forget it. Nick Wright, who I personally love because he's LeBron and I'm with him. Two of his like Giannis funny narrative type things that I've heard him saying lately are, one, Kyrie Irving is Brad Beal with the ring, and two, losing in the finals hurts Jimmy Butler's legacy because it hurt LeBron's legacy when he lost whenever he did. So I obviously don't agree. He actually didn't say that. He was asking, so does this hurt Jimmy Butler's legacy? So my question to you, do you have any, and it doesn't have to be from a current player, but in all your years of covering the sport, do you have any guys that you were just like, I am not a believer in that guy, and there's nothing he can do, there's nothing you can tell me that will change my mind?
That last one, that losing in the final, I'm just trying to process that, the Jimmy losing in the finals that nobody thought he could get to. And I like that we went to school together.
He didn't say that. He was he was saying as a joke, like, oh, so does this mean that Jimmy? But like, obviously, no.
Oh, okay, all right.
He didn't mean it, but he tweeted it out like he meant it for clicks and stuff. So, I mean,
oof, man. Well, we'll let that one stay there. The guy, and he had a hell of a bounce back year this season after getting moved to Oklahoma City. But the guy I've just never bought into as great as the narrative wanted him to believe. And this is partly because I watched him in Houston for a while, and it just didn't fit, which is why they moved him. It's Chris Paul. He's a Hall of Famer. He's going to win games somewhere. But as a guy, as like the number one face, and this, in fairness to Chris, I think this is earlier in his career. I just never bought that he could take a team as the point guard, as the number one guy, and get them there. And they had their moments in LA with the Clippers. You thought maybe it would happen. But as far as that one guy who I've just never believed in fully as the guy, it would probably be him. And part of that is because I watched him for so many years growing up. I'm like, this guy's unbelievable. And then you start to see him night to night on the floor, and he's complaining constantly. And that doesn't make him different than a lot of guys in the league. It's just that when you combine that with Houston, where he was just kind of flopping all over the floor, I was like, come on now. It really bugged me.
What Houston does, though. You go to Houston, they're unlikable.
Yeah, they have a reputation, certainly.
Narrative switch coming for Houston in the next few years. All of a sudden, people are going to be like, I love James Harden style.
Yeah, it fits into what you guys are asking before. Like, okay, that Houston going from the villains at times to like, oh, that underdog, those Rockets, they're really getting it together here. Maybe, and maybe the guy that we need to focus on is Westbrook. Like, oh, Westbrook he's kind of over the hill. That contract's not going to be great, and then like he's going to go to another team, and Russell Westbrook at the end of his
averaging a triple double.
He's really turning it around, So who knows? But the guy for me, it was just disappointing, I guess, on a personal level because you're watching Paul and you're seeing him be as great as he's been, and then to see him those last few years in Houston, just kind of he's all over the floor. Although again, in fairness, Chris Paul, this bubble and the continuation this season, by all accounts, it doesn't happen without Chris Paul. So shout out to Chris Paul for making it work the way he did in that regard, for sure.
It's funny you said Chris Paul because that's one guy that it's been for me a roller coaster because I grew up obsessed with him. Like, I had his jersey. I have a framed jersey in my room. Like, I was obsessed with him. I had his shoes, everything. And then as I got older and started really studying the game, like for my own personal gain, I was like, this guy only passes when he can get an assist, and he dribbles more than any person in the entire NBA, and like blah blah blah. Obviously, he's unbelievable, but like I don't like him as much now. And then all of a sudden, it's like now I'm like a basketball, just like a fan now again. It's like, the dude's incredible, and he took a team that wasn't supposed to be in the playoffs
He made it happen, no doubt.
Yeah, and I wanted them to beat the Rockets and all this stuff. So it's funny you say Chris Paul. I don't think I'm quite on the same level in terms of quote unquote not believing in him as a face or whatever, because I think there's only 4 of those guys in the NBA anyway, right? But it's funny you mentioned him. My last question, I know Andrew probably has a few more. My last one is something that me and Andrew have talked about individually one-on-one, but never posed it to anyone on the podcast. And I think the timing works out well considering the Heat were awesome and yada, yada, yada. We didn't mention him. Tyler Hero obviously burst onto the scene in the bubble. My question is, would you rather have whoever the number 1 pick is in the draft, so you have the number 1 pick, you get to choose whoever, or Tyler Hero?
Having talked to enough people, guys, around the league, I think plenty of them would take Hero right now just because of the uncertainty of whoever it is. I think we'd all agree as we sit here a month before the draft, there could be that star. A guy could be the next big thing in the league, but the far greater likelihood is we don't know. So in that regard, it's not so much a knock on the James Wisemans or LaMelo or whoever else you want to put in that category of being potentially the number 1 pick. It's that Hero is playing at a level offensively that most vets don't get to in the league. So the question for Hero is going to be, can he raise the level of his defensive game to a point where you can rely on him even more? And that'll be what he has to put the work in. But knowing who's out there and knowing the question marks surrounding each guy, I would probably lean towards Hero on top of the fact that confidence-wise, I mean, can we name that many rookies that have come in and they're just shooting shots all over, and you're like, well, what? He just
snarling at the non-existent crowd. I mean, it's just
right. I know, having talked to Jimmy and listened to him enough, he loves him. That's usually a good litmus test for okay, if it's good enough for Jimmy Butler, work ethic wise and improving, it should be good enough for everybody else.
Nick, I got one final question because I know you got to get out of here, get to dinner probably with like MJ, Steve Kerr, and my last question. And also, we didn't even talk about the Bulls, which we'll do come season. We'll have you back on. We'll talk about.
Do we even want to? I mean, Nick, we love you, but do we even want to do that? I don't know.
I do like the Billy Donovan hire, but guys, truly, like as somebody who lived and breathed the Bulls for so many years, it's disappointing that Doc that he got fired let go a week later, because that was the job and I still think Doc will end up there at some point, but that fit of Doc as a Chicago guy coming back to coach the Bulls, it's just too bad, because it would have fit, it would have worked, and it would have been so interesting to see all those different dynamics in play.
I agree. But my last question. So we've had Jalen Brunson on. Not to brag, but we've had Duncan Robinson on. All right. So
he had a hell of a year.
Great year. My question to you, who is kind of like your guy or your story that if you had to pick one, you're like, this interview with blank is the best thing I've ever done?
To me, there are so many cool things that have happened. It jumps to mind. I talked to Derek Rose on SportsCenter or for SportsCenter a year ago, right after he had that 50-point game, and having shared that history with him for all those years in Chicago was just cool as hell. And being able to have it filmed and everything else. In the beginning, a couple years into when I started at ESPN Chicago, Joakim, Noah, and I did a podcast. It was supposed to happen all the time. It happened once. We called it the Joe Show. And that still brings a smile to my face, thinking of like sitting with Joe at the Berto Center for 45 minutes on some Saturday before a game, and we were just riffing on a bunch of different stuff. But that one moment that you're describing, what popped into my head is this was the year Derek was on the verge of winning MVP. And we were in Charlotte, and the game ended, and I used to carry this like big box with me. It was like a big radio mic, but it was from like, the 80s, I'm sure. And you had to plug it in and carry it around. I'm carrying this thing around like I always did. I'm like, oh man, there's Michael Jordan. And for me, everybody's going to have I'm a LeBron guy, I'm a Michael guy. I was lucky enough to see Michael in person enough where I was like, this is it for me. I'll never see, in my mind, somebody that will top what he was able to accomplish on the floor. I say all that because he's walking down the hallway, and I'm like, this is my chance. And so I walk up with this like mic box on my shoulder. This is that 2010-11 season. And I was like, Michael, they were just about to do the reunion, the 20th anniversary reunion for that first title team. Yeah, so it would have been 2011 because 91.
Yeah.
And I said, can I ask you about the reunion? And he's like, all right. And so I put that mic up, and I'm like, so Michael, what do you remember? What are you looking forward to about coming back to Chicago and being around the guys? And he answers a couple questions, and then there's a pause. I was like, so Michael, what do you think about Derek potentially being the MVP this year? And he looks at me and goes, that's not about the reunion. And I'm like, well, it is like, Derek's had a hell of a year, and I think he deserves it. I about passed out. I was like, I just talked to Michael Jordan. I'm like feeding this tape, and I'm running back to the room to feed it back to the radio station, because I knew all the guys would be like, talk to Michael Jordan, but I had the tape to back up the story. So it was pretty awesome. And having talked to all the different guys over all the different years, to be able to have those couple moments with MJ is something I'll always remember.
Well, that's an amazing way to end this, Nick. We thank you for coming on. This was a blast. If you'll come on again, we definitely will have you back on again, because, would love to have you during the season to get some updates and news on when there are games actually being played. But Nick Friedell from ESPN, thank you so much.
Andrew, Joe, good to be with you guys. I'll see you later.
Thanks, man. Take care.